Welcome back. Protecting Mother Earth, protecting everybody, and just generally taking a look at issues when it comes to climate change is what we want to talk about now on Sunrise. Of course, we do know that the United Nations Climate Conference began in Brazil with a call for faster action and more togetherness. More than 50,000 people are meeting in Bane to define the future of the planet. That conference has been on for more than a week, I think almost 2 weeks now, and we got to the end of it where there are always those last-minute critical negotiations where countries that are causing climate change are trying to, have negotiations with countries that are saying, we are the ones on the receiving end and we need you to do better. That's what's always causing sticking points at these events. In the history of the United Nations Climate Conference, the United States, for the first time, has not sent a delegate. Trump is really serious about this. But the California...
This should not be surprised. That shouldn't surprise anybody.
Yes, but the California governor on Wednesday did not just attend the conference in Bane. He signed a memorandum of understanding with the Nigerian government in defiance to President Trump's rhetoric about both climate change and Nigeria. Wow. So we have Nimo Bassi, Director Health of Mother Earth Foundation, joining us this morning to talk about this. Thank you for joining us, if you're there.
Yes, I'm here. Thank
you. Great to have you. So explain to us, first of all, I know you've been following the developments in Brazil. What have you made so far of everything that has gone on during this COP30?
Thank you very much. We're not surprised by what is going on at COP30 because primarily the COP has been moving for some time now in the direction that we're seeing things. As the COP opened, the president of Brazil stated very interestingly that he said, in his words, we are moving in the right direction, but at the wrong speed. Now, moving in the right direction to me is the fact that the world is getting together to say, let's do something about climate change. But the speed aspect, it's very, very slow, totally wrong, because as you mentioned in the introduction, it's about the means of implementation of the ideas that I put on the table. And the sticky things at this COP was right at the beginning, the developing nations asked for a new mechanism called the Just Transition Work Program that would have, strengthened international cooperation and ensure that the just transition that is needed are equitable, inclusive, and responsive to the diverse needs of all the nations. Now, the developed nations did not support this idea. So right from the beginning, you find that the political divergence is clear, and this has been what has been going on. Those who are most responsible, which is industrialized nations, the rich nations, who are responsible for global warming, are not truly ready to to support and on a global scale the nations that are the victims of climate change. This is the climate politics, and we note that it's not because of lack of resources. It's what you may call lack of understanding that global warming is truly global, and that what happens to one part of the world affects everyone else. So this is the picture of the kind of COP that we're having. Even at this COP, which is termed the implementation COP by the Brazilians, the key thing is about adaptation. How adaptation, the global goals of adaptation will be advanced. Already they've started drafting the text. The week that is ending, then the week of technical negotiation. Next week will be more political. But the troubling thing about this adaptation matter is whether the indicators will be voluntary, that's what nations would do, or whether it will be in a more defined means of going by the principles of the COP itself, which is the common but differentiated responsibilities and diverse capacities.
Mr. Bassey, whenever I discuss climate change, whenever I'm in that conversation, I always like to do a bit of a refresher because I don't know whether we've gathered critical mass to be able to mobilize against what may be incoming danger. President Trump has clearly said at the UN, when he was speaking at the UNGA, that this is a hoax, that they've been saying this over and over, so nobody should be surprised I went there. Well, Gibson going there, or the California governor going there, could be both, you know, his belief in climate issues, or it's just a political gimmick from him as well, because he's a Democratic governor, to the best of my knowledge, and one of the biggest states, in fact, perhaps one of the biggest states in America. But I would like you to walk us back and why these conferences are quite important, because sometimes the more we talk about the imminent danger, the financial commitment to be able to avert or reduce this imminent danger is always a contentious issue. It's where you put your money where your mouth is. So why do we have that, you know, disconnect?
Yes, you're right. Finance is a critical issue where you don't have a common agreement between all the parties. In recent times, it's been agreed that the nations, that the COP should come up with $1.3 trillion to really finance adaptation, which would mostly go to developing vulnerable, impacted nations. But you see, when the finances are brought up to go in that direction, you now see that the rich nations are not willing to generally, they may agree to the idea, but they're not ready to put the funds. Now, if you go back in history, up to 2010, there was the idea that some nations, the rich nations, were grouped as Annex 1. That was the classification. And they were to reduce emissions at certain measurable and binding scales. But from that meeting that took place in Copenhagen, Denmark, the issue of voluntary emission reduction came in. At that time, the world was afraid that we'll be going to a temperature increase of above 1 degree beyond the pre-industrial levels. But now, what the Paris Agreement said is that the best target is 1.5 degrees Celsius beyond above the pre-industrial levels, or well below 2, whatever that means. But the fact is that right now, the world is on track to go above 2, to go maybe 2.2, 3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, because nations are only cutting emissions, are ready to cut emissions at voluntary levels. And a country like Nigeria has proposed is what they want to do in the NDC, which is National Determined Contributions. That's what most nations are putting on the table. And if nations do what they said they would do, what is convenient for them to do, then we are on the path of massive global heating, not just warming. This is the challenge. Now, when President Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, as you also said, that wasn't surprising at all. Why was it not surprising? Because we all know what it stands for. But, you know, to me, what the negative aspect of that is that the United States would not contribute, for example, finance. We are one of the biggest polluters in the world. But the good thing, again, is that the United States would not be at the negotiating table to impede progress. So the world can move without that big impediment that has been occurring year after year. So there are different ways to look at it. You cannot, this climate politics. Climate politics is real, and the positions are clear. So it's for the negotiation is how to bridge the gap, how to bring about understanding. And there's been very many creative ideas brought by indigenous people, groups fighting for rights of nature. So let's look at the whole picture. We're all on the same planet. We're in the same universe. And what affects one affects everyone. This is the critical idea. Apart from that, we have to recognize the colonial implications of climate change. Who has taken the resources, who has pumped the carbon into the atmosphere, and who should do their fair share. This is the politics, and our politicians just have to dig in more and bring up the issues without looking as though they are pleading for resources, because this is not a question of charity. It's a question of reality of what to do for the collective good of humanity and the planet itself.
Right, and do you think that, as they always do, these developed countries, you just spoke about people that came in to, kind of cause all these things in the first place. There's always a stalling process, and agreements are, they agree to disagree, and they don't want to agree to a lot of things. Do you see, with the United States out of the picture, so to speak, do you think the negotiations will be faster this time and things will be smoother and more commitments will be made?
I would like to say yes, it will be faster. But again, even though they are not in Belém, in the conference halls, they have influence in the backgrounds. The other good thing is that the President of the United States doesn't really, is not a person that any of the allies will say, well, this is really, is having our back, because we've seen the antecedents and what the kind of politics they're playing in the world. But by and by, I do believe that there should be less gruesome, it's going to be faster, and at the end, well, at the end of every COP, there's always something to clap about, something to say, well, something has been done, but honestly speaking, I'm not optimistic that whatever comes up with more than just what is written on paper, because as I said earlier, the critical, and you also said the critical thing is to finance the action, to implement means of implementation of whatever decision is made. We've had loss and damage on the table. We now have issue. We have general issue of climate finance. Now we you know, in everything that is on the table, the issue of who brings the funds is a critical thing, and it's a climate debt, which I believe our politicians should be pressing. That after years of colonialism, years of exploitation, years of harming our capacity to be resilient, somebody has to pay for that because of the collective needs of everyone.
Let's talk about adaptation. You know, there are two phases of this conversation, and that makes developing nations sometimes squirm because of its long-term economic impact, because you have to look at home and say, okay, what exactly is my cash cow before I sign up to these things? I think the biggest one is we're one of the biggest people that are affected the most, for lack of a better word. So we always ask for some of these monies for to be able to cushion the effects of the harm that has been done to the environment, because although we are told that about 70% of strategic minerals are in Africa, we account for less than 3% of global manufacturing. So you can see how this comes and all the destruction that are coming in that direction. So let's talk about adaptation, and especially transition, which is what the developing world are advocating for. While we're discussing that, Trump is saying, drill, baby, drill. And then we are quick to begin to have this conversation. Are we really going in the right direction, if you get my drift?
I get it, and you put it so beautifully. Trump says, drill, baby, drill, and the world generally says, no, we have to put the brakes. And you know, the influence of, when you have a powerful figure, political figure, making statements like that, it does really bring about a chill, even in the industrial sector, because where the banks would like to finance, institutions would like to finance transition, but when they see that the short-term investment in fossil fuels will bring in more revenue, then they move in that direction. But the thing is that the fossil fuel sector is actually, whether anybody likes it or not, is winding down. In a couple of decades, it will be more or less history, except maybe in a place like Nigeria, where we now have to invest in cleanup and decommissioning of the facilities that are posing serious threats to our people. So it's true that a lot of transition minerals are in Africa, and we are the least, they are contributing the least amongst the nations in terms of the carbon budget that is that we're contending with. But why the transition has to be just. It's not just about the jobs, that people will lose jobs in the fossil fuel sector, that the economy may not go well for those who are dependent on fossil fuels. There's also the problem that we're seeing in the transition in terms of the minerals. In a place like Congo, Democratic Republic, millions have been displaced just because either through violence, conflict, war, or because some people want to have access to the mine pits and mine without any accountability or responsibility to the state or to nature. And so the transition carries on with the same way that fossil fuels have been extracted. Then it would just be you changing the means of the kind of where the energy source is coming from, but you are still punishing those who are living in the territories where these resources are found. And now we've seen the fossil fuel sector has created many sacrifice zones like the Niger Delta in Nigeria, the Sucumbios, the Amazonian area of Ecuador and other places. And so if this is duplicated or replicated with regard to transition minerals and the transition program, then the world is still in a very bad shape. And so the justice is primarily, in my understanding, to ensure that the environment is not damaged, to ensure that those who live in those territories are consulted and have free, prior, informed consent, and that if they say don't touch this resource, that is respected because their life depends on the environment. And at the end of the day, without a safe environment, transition or no transition, everybody's doomed. And so nature is so critical. And nature, in fact, has rights to exist and to replicate her natural cycles without undue interference with humans who are just one part of those of the beings living on the planet.
And so the delegation of Nigeria that went for this conference, I mean, I'm sure there was a lot that they had to discuss. Every country is fighting for itself. I think Nigeria wanted to host the next one. They lost that bid, and but there are several.
It's going to Ethiopia.
Yeah, it's going to Ethiopia. Yeah. So there were several things that played out. Does Nigeria have a position of strength so far? I think this conference is supposed to end on November 21 or so. What's Nigeria's position right now? Do we have a position of strength while negotiating for benefits from this climate conference?
Well, nations, although nations go individually, nations also go to the negotiations in blocks.
Blocks, yes.
So, in blocks. So Nigeria is part of the African group, the group of G77 and China. So Nigeria's positions will have to align with what that group stands for. And the group has been generally very progressive, making clear demands of what is needed in terms of the means of implementation of whatever is agreed on. And so the thing is to have cohesion within the groups and then to build bridges with the other groups. So that is what, especially with the EU, which is the Environmental Integrity Group and others, they have to build bridges with these groups, and really, it takes a lot of politics. And so I don't really envy the delegates who are negotiating. But let me just say this, that at every conference of parties, you have the inside, which is where the negotiation is taking place, and then you have the outside, where civil society, community people, indigenous people are meeting daily. And if you compare the two, it's like two worlds apart. Because in the people's space, the people's summit, you find that clear solutions are being placed on the table. They're always stated every day. The solutions are repeated, reiterated, are coming up. But in the conference halls, the politicians are playing politics with climate change. And this is a sad thing, very sad thing. One of the sticky things has been transition from fossil fuels. And the president of Brazil made an indication that this is time to really think seriously about that. And for Brazil to say this is surprising and interesting because it's a petro state, just like Nigeria, just like the last three or so hosts of the Conference of Parties. And so we're hoping that when politicians begin to discuss, they would bury some of their position that is not that doesn't really support the integrity and the health of the planet, and focus on the future and generation that will come before us. Now, why is the problem in the COP is mainly that the past COPs have focused more on mitigation rather than adaptation. And so this is a positive thing this time, that there's more emphasis on adaptation. Mitigation allows for the political activities to go on, then supports industries who are proposing all kinds of fictional things, mechanisms to suck carbon out of the atmosphere, to bury carbon in the ground, or to put it at the bottom of the ocean. So many geoengineering proposals, and also carbon offset, which all nations tend to like. It's a false solution, like saying you have carbon credits because you have a forest and the trees don't live forever. So it's complicated, I would say.
Yeah, Mr. Vase, I'm going to go back to always our seat on the table. Now, I'm going to talk continent-wide now. I think it was Professor Lumumba who said, Mr. Bassey, I was talking about the issue of Africa having a seat on the table significantly. It was Professor Lumumba who said that the world seems to have a plan for Africa, but does Africa have a plan for the world? Now, last 50 years, I was at a conference recently when they were talking about the last 50 years was about oil and gas and all of that, but the next 50 years about critical minerals for energy transition for a decarbonized economy. And Africa is going to be central as a hub. But central as a hub as what? Because that in itself, if we don't hold that conversation intelligently, smartly, and with enough stake on the table, then we will still in the next 50 years after still be playing this victim game, come and compensate us. What do you make of it?
I like the way you ended that framing with the Africa playing the victim. But really, this you have to distinguish between the politicians from Africa and not just the politicians from Africa. You have to know also about the people in Africa. What are the people saying? What are the politicians saying? Is there a congruence? Is there a confluence between what the people are saying and what the politicians are saying? So the politicians basically need to listen to the people so that we don't keep on playing the victim or carrying empty balls and looking for finances. When you go to a conference of this nature, asking for funds, sometimes you can't really have a strong position because those giving you the funds will now have the upper hand. This is why the politics is so interesting. And like you framed it, the next resources that will be important for the world are the transition element. But already these are called critical minerals. When that phrase, critical minerals, also connotes the fact that, look, these minerals are critical, nobody should do anything about stopping our access to it, and then you open up to more damage to the environment. So these minerals are not really critical, they are just useful minerals for the purpose, and they could be replaced by some other things. So the world is moving fluidly, technology is improving, it's changing, and the issue is what technology is most suited for the people, for the common people, for the commonality of the people, and not just the interests of industry. But yes, we have to be strategic, otherwise we're going to have harms as we're seeing in Congo. In Nigeria, a mineral like lithium is being mined. Who is regulating that? Who is watching what is going on? If you go to communities, even in the Federal Capital Territory, you find that there is reckless exploitation ongoing. And these areas are looking like almost, I don't want to say war zones, they're looking like conflict zones, and we need to really look at our backyard and decide where we are going.
Right. We're about to, close you out now, but very quickly, when we started this program, we started with something that we thought was beautiful. Secondary schools being helped to create businesses while they're right there in school, and they were merging that with academics. So I want to talk to you about the youth. We've had all these, conferences and negotiations, and we're talking about the future, eradicating oil and adaptation. Jeffrey has said a lot. So, when we talk about Africa, helping itself and not playing the victim, what role should the youth now, people that are young now, what role should they start looking at playing in ensuring that at the end of the day, in the next 30, 40 years, Africa indeed does not still play the victim?
Yes, indeed. The youth will have to play a critical role and be on the table also. That is something that needs to happen. But what the youth require also is to learn from history. Many of our youth, I would say, I may be wrong, but from the youth I interact with, they are not very conversant with the struggles that led to African independence in many nations. And so they just see the set of politicians we have today, some who are sit-tight politicians who are manipulating the system. And so it can be, there's a lot of disillusionment amongst young people. So we need to go back to history. Let's learn our history. Let's see how it was youth that brought independence to Africa. And use one more time, have to bring the new level of independence that we need, not just in terms of climate change, but in terms of defining what development means to Africa, what the future should be like. It's when we have the clear picture of the future that we can build the pathways to that future. And the young people must be on the scene. Nigeria's had not too young to run and other such programs. I think we really need to spend more time learning from our wisdom, local wisdom, learning from what is going on, know what is really going on and what must not go on. And this is what I think this is the basics, the basic platform in which youths can begin to build the pathways to the future that would make Africa take its own place. But really, we have the solutions. We have the wisdom.
All right.
Take, for example, we have the solution, I would say.
Mr. Nemo, before we let you go, Mr. Bassi, we understand that Ken Saro-Wiwa and the 9 were honored at COP30. How does that make you feel? And why is that important and significant for all of us?
Remembering Ken Saro-Wiwa at the global stage is very significant, and having that remembrance also at the conference, at the COP in Berlin, Brazil, was very, very important. It makes me, it gives us courage to understand that what happened 30 years ago should not happen again, and that those who were murdered judicially at that time were wrongfully killed, they should be exonerated. And, it also brings to the fore, because as we speak now, some of the oil wells that were abandoned in Ogoni, they are still spilling oil. So we need to have a restoration fund. We need to have a clear audit of the entire region, and all those oil wells that were abandoned. The first oil well at Oloibri, at Otuabagi Oloibri field in Bayelsa, all those wells were abandoned in the 70s. They were never decommissioned. They were never removed. The environment never restored. They are still polluting. So we remember Ken Saro-Wiwa and the 9, and also the 4 chiefs who lost their lives. But we have to also use this as a point to say, well, these people fought for the real climate action, which is keeping the carbon in the ground. But the pollution that will be visited on our regions are still there and not touched. And so this is an agenda that needs to be faced.
Right. Pleasure again having you on the program. Director Health of Mother Earth Foundation, Nemo Bassi. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much.
And stay with us. We'll be right back for our lifestyle segment.